presentation on local historic districts and why they are so good. I want to take this just a minute to tell you all about our upcoming DAHP Academies, and we'll put a link in the chat for those. The next ones we have coming up are Wizard Recording Historic Properties on Historic Property Inventory Form DAHP Academy sessions on October, let's see, we have October 24th and November 14th for those, and then we have another tips for searching Wizard on September 10th and tips for using the map in Wizard on September 24th. So we'll put the link in the chat so you can see when those are upcoming. I want to let everyone know that we are in fact recording this, so if you don't want to be recorded, you should go ahead and log off. And you can also find on the link I will put in the chat the previously recorded sessions that we did earlier in the year. So you can find links to everything we've done already. So thanks again for attending. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Michelle.
Thanks, Kim. Hi, everybody. I see a lot of friendly faces here, lots of people I know. So welcome to Local Historic Districts and Why They Matter. So I'm going to speak for a little while, I'll introduce myself here in just a moment, and then I'm going to turn it over to Megan Duval at the end of the presentation. Megan is the Historic Preservation Officer for the City of Spokane, and she was also in my position for a number of years. So we're going to tag team this, and then we're going to leave some time for some questions. And we'll put out the recording on our YouTube channel. So I'm Michelle Thompson. I'm the Certified Local Government Coordinator and the Main Street Design Specialist here at DAHP, Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. So before we begin talking about local historic districts today, let's set a little bit of context. I have a tendency to try to give too much context, so I try to pare it down and just give you what you need. But anything really at the end, I'm going to leave my contact information. Any questions you have for follow-up, anything that doesn't make sense, please get in touch with me. So I want you to know a couple things. There are three possible historic registers. There's the National Register of Historic Places, there's the Washington State Heritage Register, and then we have local registers. Out of those three historic registers, each one is separate. It is a separate nomination process. They have separate benefits and they have separate restrictions. So the National Register of Historic Places, this is the one that people are most familiar with. This is the kind of gold star, the hardest one to get on at the federal level. The National Register of Historic Places is what we call honorary. So listing a property on the National Register of Historic Places has many benefits. However, it does not place restrictions on a private property owner regarding use, maintenance, or alterations or demolition to a property. So that's something a lot of people tend to be surprised about, that it doesn't place those restrictions with the National Register. We also have the Washington State Heritage Register. The state register is also honorary. So listing a property on the Washington State Heritage Register also does not place restrictions on a private property owner regarding use, maintenance, or alterations or demolition to a property. And then finally, we have local registers. So unlike the national and state registers, listing a property on the local register in a community with a certified local government status, and we'll talk about what that is in just a moment, does place restrictions on private property owners regarding alterations and in some cases demolition to a property. So the local register does place restrictions. So what makes a local register different? The Certified Local Government, or CLG program in Washington State both allows and requires CLG Commission members to perform a review of alterations known as a design review to properties listed on the local register or within a local register district. A property can be listed on one, two, or all three of those registers. However, and this is coming from our Washington State Assistant Attorney General that we got clarification with recently on this. If a local CLG is going to review alterations to a National Register listed properties, they must first go through the process of adding the property to their local register. So if CLG's authority is to review local register properties. Authority to review of a dual registered property, so something on the local register, the National Register, the Washington State Heritage Register, on is actually authority to review the local register property. So to kind of break that down a little bit, you can have something listed on all three of those registers, but if you were going to do a review of changes, you need to have it listed also on your local register. That's where your authority to review changes to the resource comes from. And that comes from your local historic preservation ordinance. So there's a language about design review in your local historic preservation ordinance. I encourage all of you that are in a certified local government, I know several of you here are, or are thinking about being part of a certified local government, to look at your local historic preservation ordinance or the draft template that we have at DAHP. So all CLGs in Washington state, they must adopt and enforce an ordinance to acquire and maintain program status. So they're required to adopt an ordinance. So that design review language, or the ability to be able to review changes to stuff listed on the local register or within a local register district, commonly that language looks like what's on the screen. No person shall change the use, construct any new building or structure, or reconstruct, alter, restore, remodel, repair, move, or demolish, this is from Cheney, any existing property on the Cheney Register of Historic Places or within a Cheney local Cheney Register district without review by the commission. And then they need to receive something called a certificate of appropriateness. So I keep talking about certified local governments. So what is a certified local government? A certified local government, or CLG, is a community with a local historic preservation commission that has been certified by the National Park Service. Think of it kind of like an accreditation. So CLG status comes with benefits and requirements. In Washington state, the CLG program is implemented and administered by DAHP. Okay, so now we're on to local historic districts. So giving you a little bit of background. What is a local historic district? A local historic district is an area or group of related historic resources deemed significant to the city's cultural fabric. They're protected by local review, right? We talked about that, design review. This can include downtown, commercial areas, main streets, waterfront districts, residential districts. Most often, communities create local districts to prevent unregulated and insensitive change. Before you start thinking about a historic district, a local historic district, you want to lay some groundwork. You want to have surveyed the area that you're thinking about nominating for a district. And you want to conduct a lot of outreach. You want to gain support. You want to do local education. This isn't just something to just kind of jump right into. There's a lot of groundwork that you're going to want to lay before a local district. So the survey, these are really common. These are something that CLGs can apply for every year for our annual CLG grants to do a survey of a neighborhood or a potential local register district. And the consultant, you can hire a professional consultant, and they will give you a report. And one of the things that will be in the report is you have a potential register district here or you don't. They'll give you some ideas for boundaries, and they'll talk about the buildings that are eligible to be in the district. So local historic districts, you're going to get all kinds of responses from people, right? You're going to get from people in the potential district. You're going to get, I love historic districts and regulations, count me in. You're going to get the, why is the government telling me what to do? How do I stop this nonsense? And then just to be okay, what kind of a burden can this be on me, right? This is the stuff that you really want to be able to be prepared to answer and talk about. And I am always happy to help with that. But that's something you really want to do before you think about a local register district. So outreach, local support, education, hold public meetings, create flyers, brochures, explaining what the district means, develop an FAQ, get your stories in the news, talk to local officials, residents, be the face, especially with the certified local government, those commission members, right? You're the face of historic preservation in your community. Talk to people and be, approachable and be able to answer those questions. So the national or the local register districts have a nomination form, just like the National Register or the Washington State Register. So, within your certified local government community, you should have a nomination form. And if this is something you don't have or something that you think is a little weak and needs some bulking up, I am always happy to take a look at it and help you bulk it up. So, the nomination forms have several parts, but they will have criteria for listing on the local register or within the local register district. So, the resources that are going to be in your local register district will either be contributing or non-contributing. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And then there's going to be a period of significance. So like 1945 to 1970. Again, we're going to talk about all this stuff in just a moment. And again, districts are listed through a public process, and that process needs to be laid out in your ordinance before you start with a local register nomination or district nomination. So this is what it might look like in your ordinance. The criteria for listing a local district, criteria for determining designation in the register. Any building, structure, site, object, or district may be designated for inclusion in, again, this is Cheney Register of Historic Places, if it is sufficiently associated with the history, architecture, archaeology, engineering, or cultural heritage of the community, if it has integrity, we'll talk about all of the stuff in just a moment, is at least 50 years old, or less if it has exceptional importance, and it falls into at least one of the following categories. So this is just very typical language for a historic preservation ordinance in terms of what qualifies to add a local district or to add a property to your local register. Okay, you're going to see something like this in your local ordinance. There's going to be a list of typical criteria for listing a property or listing a district on your local register. This comes from Cheney. Again, I live in Cheney. So this comes from Cheney's ordinance. So there are more than this. CLGs often have things that kind of massage this language a little bit. They might have a couple other criteria for nomination. So it's typically things like, events is the district or eligible because of its connection to events? Is there an architectural connection, right? You've got like something that was all developed within the same time period, maybe like a mid-century neighborhood, a downtown. Is it the outstanding work of a designer, building, or architect? Special elements of the city's history? Is it related to people? So these are just very typical. You're going to want to consult your own ordinance for this, but you're going to have criteria for listing a local district. So I said the period of significance, right? So for a historic district, the period of significance, it's a date range. It usually starts with the date of the oldest feature. So maybe the oldest building in your downtown. So 1850 or 1850 to 1952, for example, if it was in a downtown district. So this rationale is based on the continuity of the historic context, the integrity of the resources that were constructed during that period. So was there an obvious event that brought construction to a halt? That might be an end of the period of significance, or is it continuous up until 50 years of age? Could be the last date a house was built in the plat, or last building built downtown before World War II. So there's all kinds of reasons for that period of significance that you wouldn't want to make that argument for when it begins and when it ends. So I keep using these terms, contributing. So properties within a historic district fall in one or two types of properties, contributing and non-contributing. Contributing resources are those constructed during that period of significance, which substantially convey their appearance from that period, aka they have not been substantially altered. We call this having integrity. Non-contributing resources are those that do not date from the period of significance and or have been substantially altered. So you might have, a building that's very old, from 1900, 1899, but it's been altered to the point that it's not conveying its significance or it's not conveying its connection to the story of your local register district. So an example of the public process language for creating a local historic district and a local historic preservation ordinance. So this is what you're looking at in terms of how you're going to vote, like what the public process is for creating this historic district, right? So it's not just an act of council. It's something I've touched on this before. It's something that's actually a public process that you want to do outreach. There's going to be a vote amongst the property owners within the boundaries of the proposed district. So this comes from Sumner's ordinance. In the case of historic districts, the commission shall consider a simple majority of property owners, 50% plus 1% of property owners, to be adequate for owner consent. Owner consent and notification procedures in the case of districts shall be further defined in rules, that means their bylaws. The public property owners and the authors of the nomination, if different, and lessees, if any, shall be notified in the listing. So this is just not super important for you to know exactly this, but just know that there is language in an ordinance, and there needs to be language in your local ordinance about the process for creating a local historic district. What's your public process? So this is an example. This comes from Linden, and this is in their bylaws. And so this really lays out like the education, how they do their public meetings for the process, how they're going to put out the information, right? Flyers, newspapers, that kind of stuff. It really lays it out. And it's a good idea to have this, and it's a good idea to do it in your bylaws instead of having all of this information crowding your ordinance. Talks about how you're going to create the boundaries, the voting process, right? You can see they've got several things about the voting process. So this is really great what Linden's done here. It really lays out exactly how they're going to do the local register nomination process. And again, I will send this, you'll get a recording of this, and I'll let you know when the recording is ready. And I think we might be able to find a way to send out the slides to everybody too, so you have this. But if you want a copy of this, you can always just ask me. So, what are some of the benefits, right, besides maintaining that historic character of your local district through being able to do a design review, right, of the changes in your local district? So, one of the big benefits is that you can do something called design guidelines. So, all of the certified local governments, they have to adopt a basic set of guidelines that ensures fair and effective local design review process, right? This is for everything, anything that's on your local register. Most commonly, these are the Secretary of the Interior standards. Probably most people on here are familiar with these for the treatment of historic properties. So there are 10 standards to help properties retain historic character. They have an emphasis on repair over replace, replace in kind, reversible and compatible changes, that kind of thing. So a CLG, you can opt to solely use the Secretary of the Interior standards for your local register district, should you be able to get a local register district. But you can also adopt design guidelines, and those design guidelines are tailored to your local register historic district. And this is another thing that you can use those annual CLG grants to hire a consultant to write for you and to work with your community to produce these design guidelines for your local district. So design guidelines created for local historic districts, they're shaped by the existing character of the historic district. In other words, they're tailored to the district. So you'll have consultants come in and really look at what is the historic character, it really to things, like windows and setbacks and height, all of that kind of stuff. And then they'll write these guidelines specifically to your local register district, which is wonderful. So design guidelines, especially when they're illustrated, they go a long way in maintaining the historic character of a district. They're easier for property owners to understand, especially those illustrated ones. And they make the design review process for your Historic Preservation Commission a lot more streamlined. So there's a lot of benefits to having these design guidelines. And then another benefit of a local register district is being able to open up special tax valuation to people or to property owners whose buildings are contributing to the local register district. So special tax valuation, this is unique to Washington State. It was a legislation that was passed in 1985. So local governments implement the special tax valuation law through their local historic preservation ordinance. So the local government determines which properties are eligible for special tax valuation. Generally, these properties are the things that are listed on your local register in a CLG. They can be used for substantial rehabilitation for either residential or commercial properties. And the fact that they can be used for residential properties is a pretty big deal. It's very rare that there are historic preservation incentives for residential properties. Usually, things like the National Register of Historic Places, that the main incentives that are applied to that are for commercial or income producing buildings. So the work for special tax valuation has to be done within a 24-month period prior to the application. So the amount of the rehabilitation subtracted from the property value is subtracted from the property value for a period of 10 years. And that's more in CLG communities with 10,000 or less than 20,000 people in an economically distressed county. So this was a law that was this was an update to that special valuation law just in 2020 that extends two 7 year extensions to that 10-year period for the special valuation if you're under 20,000 in an economically distressed community. So that's pretty good. That's a very long time. Again, please get in touch with me about the nitty-gritty of how special tax valuation works. But in a nutshell, the substantial rehabilitation means that the money that the property owner puts into rehabilitation needs to be at least 25% of the building value minus the value of the land. You can see this example over here. So say that your building value started out at 50,000. You put 25% of eligible costs into or qualifying expenses into your building, into your home. So that was $12,500. So the actual amount spent on rehab then equals, $50,000. Then the county assessor reassesses the value of your property, and you're able to subtract that $50,000, that special valuation from your property for 10 years to up to 24 years. So it doesn't prevent property taxes from going up. They can still go up for sure, but you throughout that special tax valuation period, you are able to take off that a special valuation, that chunk of money from your property taxes. So to recap, a local historic district allows several related resources to be added to the local register at once. That's great. This allows protections to a historic district, to the historic character of the local district through design review. Contributing buildings in the local district are eligible for special tax valuation. And all of this, and I've said this a few times throughout, is you want to consult your local ordinance. They're all a little bit different. And if you've got questions about your ordinance, talking to your city liaison person, if you're in a certified local government community, is the first start. And if you're not sure who that is, I'm happy to point you to that person to connect you. And I'm happy to answer any questions that I can about that. So there is my contact information. Call me, email me anytime. I will do my best to answer. If I can't answer a question, I will figure out how to answer your question. I'll get back to you. So I'm going to keep that up on the screen. Well, we have Megan Duval join us and talk about Spokane's local historic preservation. Thanks, Kim. About Spokane's local historic district process. And Spokane has more local registers or local historic districts than any other community in the state of Washington. So, Megan,
Yes. Can you hear me?
are you there?
Yes.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
You're low, but wait, let me
Oh.
wait. Can everybody else hear Megan?
Hello, hello, hello.
There you
Better,
go.
Yes, you're
better,
good.
that's better.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thanks.
Everyone else is like, oh.
Right. Hi, Megan. So we had a couple questions that we were going to talk about that I sent over to you, and now I'm so sorry. I had them right in front of me. Stick it out. I'm so sorry. Give me just a second.
No
Oh, so
problem.
okay. So I was going to actually know them off the top of my head. I was going to ask you. So how many local districts do you have in Spokane?
Well, that's an easy question. So right now well, it's not that easy. Of course, everything's always, but so we have four current local historic districts. We really have six, but one really large district actually subsumed two of the smaller districts that we had. So we have Brown's Edition, which started as a National Register Historic District in, I think, 1976. It's about 300 properties and became a local historic district in 2019. We also have Corbin Park, which has been a local historic district since the 90s here in Spokane, about 88 properties. The Hilliard Historic District in the early 2000s, that's a small business district with about 20 properties. And then the Cannon Streetcar Suburb Historic District, which was our most recent one, passed in 2023, and that's just under 500 properties. But we're actually working on one that's literally in the process of next week we'll be in front of the Landmarks Commission for listing, or at least for its recommendation to City Council for the district. From the Landmarks Commission, it goes on to Plan Commission and the City Council probably this fall. And that one is roughly 200 properties, and it's called the Cannon Hill Park Historic District. So that's what we got. Oops. Now I can't hear
Sorry,
you.
that's
Okay,
sorry.
there we go.
Thank you, Megan. No, that's awesome. And then Spokane also just got a CLG grant from this round to do
Yes,
that local historic. Yeah, so that came
exactly.
from our CLG grant funding.
Yep.
Cool. So can you tell us a little bit about what your ordinance language says for creating local districts?
Yeah, sure. So that was a really good rundown of ordinances in general, and in Spokane, sort of the same thing, where we have how we actually create the historic district is through an overlay zone. So we go through the nomination process. We have all of those documents, just like you laid out, Michelle. We have a nomination document in that it has all resource forms. So basically, a little snapshot of each property that's within the district, whether it's contributing or non-contributing. Talk about year of construction, maybe a little architectural description. This last one, we didn't do too much on the architecture beyond just marking whether or not the materials were original or if they've been changed, that kind of thing. So that's the nomination. We have the design standards and guidelines document for each district. And then it also lays out the voting process. So we have a 60-day window to basically have ballots sent out to property owners within the district. And then they have 60 days to return them to us. We also have 50% plus one is considered owner consent for listing. And I know now with the owner consent provisions at the state, it's probably important that we make sure we say the words owner consent. And that's what constitutes owner consent in Spokane. So those are kind of the basics of what the ordinance talks about. We also just things that we have to do in Spokane is because our ordinance is located. Our historic preservation ordinance is located within our land use code. So the chapter of Spokane's preservation ordinance just happens to fall in this land use. So we have to go through, a SEPA checklist. We have to let Commerce know that we're changing our unified development code because that's, these are the weeds kinds of things that you don't really think about. But we also have to go through Plan Commission for a recommendation on any changes to our chapter of the municipal code in Spokane. So when we create a district, we actually create an ordinance for that specific district. It's not a long, involved ordinance, but it basically lays out why the ordinance is what it's doing, and includes a map for the overlay. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So we always have a new section of our ordinance. So we're adding to our land use code basically in Spokane.
Great. Thanks, Megan.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm also really curious about, because we talked about this quite a bit and how important it is. What about that outreach and owner support, and how are you doing your education for communities? How are you addressing that in Spokane?
Yeah, so we do a couple different things. So we've actually had ordinances created or districts created through CLG grants, which has been great. So both of our Browns Edition district and the Cannon Streetcar Suburb Historic District were both CLG grant sponsored or funded. We did the work in-house for the Cannon Streetcar Suburb District, but back in when we did Brown's Edition, I didn't have a second person in the office, so it was just me. So we hired consultants to do that particular one. Um, so the important thing about anytime you're thinking about a local district is yeah, you have to, I mean, it needs to come originally from the neighborhood or the district that is looking for a district. You have to know, is this even something that people are going to support? Because it is a huge, long process. It's not easy. It's super heavy staff time to do, especially when you're doing it in-house. And it's expensive. You know, if you're just getting a CLG grant, it could be expensive to have a consultant do it depending on the size of the district. So really you have to know if this is going to pass before you start. And it could be close. I mean, it can be close, but you have to know that you have a good volunteer group as well from the neighborhood. So the most recent one that we're working on right now, that one, it's very confusing because we have the Cannon Streetcar Suburb Historic District, and then just a little farther up the hill, a little south of that district, is the Cannon Hill Park Historic District. Now that one, we did not get a grant for. We actually didn't have any staff involvement in terms of writing the nomination or the design standards and guidelines. That was a neighborhood driven process.
I wondered,
Now,
I saw that the
yeah,
other day. Okay, yeah.
yeah.
Well,
They are in like kind of the perfect scenario for having the basically the personnel to do it and just the involvement because they have a preservation consultant who is a architectural historian who lives within the district. She was served on our landmarks commission for her 6 years as one of our historians. And they also have a very dear friend of mine who moved into Spokane from Denver, who watched his little neighborhood of craftsmen in Denver be bought up, demolished, and replaced with big Denver boxes, that went from property line to property line pretty much. He didn't want that to happen in his new home community of Spokane, and so he just started talking to me as soon as they got here and said, "What do I do to get a local historic district?" And so I walked him through the process, and he really took it and ran with it. And so that has been a very grassroots process, really from the beginning. So obviously we take and we edit the nominations, we help them with the design standards and guidelines, because luckily all the ones we've had so far are all residential districts. They're not a lot different from each other in terms of what kinds of resources they have. So we've kind of recycled those design standards and guidelines for each. But we do have illustrated guidelines, as Michelle mentioned, and it's super helpful. Every picture of every house in those design standards and guidelines is from the district. So it's a good way of, for people to recognize their own home or your neighbor's home. So I think they can visualize it a lot better. So yeah, so that's, that was interesting to have it, this really volunteer effort. So we, of course, have to do the actual voting. So when it gets to that point where we're actually sending out the ballots, we did that. We received the ballots. We keep the vote and the tally here in the office. But we also participated in workshops with the neighborhood. We did a couple different workshops. We've had a couple mailings to the whole neighborhood, including, when we send out the ballot, we're also sending a map, and we're also sending a little bit of an explanation of what this is. So anyway, I'll just say this district, it's very old school historic district. It's what you'd expect a historic district to look like. It's nice homes surrounding a park. And they have had nearly 80% voter turnout. We've received ballots
wow.
back. which is really very high. And I'd say of the 191 properties, I think just today, 143 or 153 yes votes. The ballot ends on Monday. It'll go before the Landmarks Commission on Wednesday. So it's a very high percentage of yes votes. Basically, they're well over the 50% plus one in order to create the district. I did notice in Linden that they said any ballot that's not returned counts as implied consent, which
Ask you about this, what you do.
I feel like I used to say that when I was a CLG coordinator, Michelle, because I was thinking of it along the same lines as the National Register. You know, if you don't hear anything, we just assume you're okay with it. You know, if you haven't made the effort to actually send something that is in disagreement with whatever's going on. In Spokane, we talked to our attorneys about it, and they said, no, you have to count them as no votes. So if people don't turn it in, you have to count it as a no. And so that's what we've done. And we haven't had a problem reaching our 50% plus one in any of the districts. I think Brown's edition was like 56%, and maybe the next district was like 58%. This one will be probably nearing 70% in favor of creating the district, which is it's a great tool to have in your back pocket when you go to city council and when you go to plan commission. And you know, so just to say, hey, listen, people want this, you know. So anyway, that's kind of how we do it in Spokane. But really doing as much outreach as possible, and the neighborhood volunteers are instrumental. This particular district that we're going through right now, I mean, they've knocked on their neighbors' doors many, many times. We also keep a separate spreadsheet of balloting. So we have our voting one, which is confidential. We're obviously not going to share that, but we have the another one that just shows who's returned a ballot. So we provide, you know, weekly or every other week to the proponents of the district. Hey, here's an updated list of who's returned their ballots. So they don't know how they voted. They just don't bother those people anymore. So that we, you know, but they do know who did, then they can target to say, hey, just return your ballot, you know. So anyway, they've done a really good job, obviously.
You answered my questions, some of my questions before I even asked them, or some of my follow-up questions. That's wonderful. Yeah. And just as Megan's stressing, having done that groundwork and having that support, you know, when communities have applied for a district, whether it's National Register, local register, for our certified local government grants, it's imperative that they can come to us and say, look, we've got support for this, because, you know, we're all of that time and effort and money, you know, that goes into the nomination. You really want to make sure that you've got a good chance of that happening before starting the process. So,
yeah, you don't want the first thing to be, oh, here, I received a ballot in the mail. What does this even mean? You know, you definitely want this conversation to have been going on for a long time. So, you know, we have a lot of neighborhood councils in Spokane. So, you know, we're a larger, you know, it's a larger operation, I guess. So, you know, the neighborhood councils are a great place to start. And I've been to many, many neighborhood councils where they've said, can you come and talk to us about what historic districts are? So, you know, I mean, that's a place where some of those have come from. Brown's edition, certainly, and the Cannon, the original Cannon district. Those both came from the neighborhood council saying, these are, and they were much more of a mixed use neighborhood where they already had a lot of density and a lot of infill, and they were worried about losing more and more of their historic resources in those neighborhoods to new development. And so, you know, in Spokane, we actually can deny demolition to locally listed properties. So if there is something that is a historic property in a historic district that's on the Spokane Register, we can actually say no to a demolition. But they also were concerned about what the infill development would look like if you know, there were any lots like this new one that we have going through there's no developable lots in this neighborhood. So something would have to get torn down. Also, out of the 191 properties, only 11 are non-contributing, which is also very crazy, you know, like to have that high of contributing rate. So, you know, but, you know, if one of those 11 properties that's been changed or is outside of the period of significance, you know, potentially that could get demolished, but we would have review of what the new construction looked like. So in our design standards and guidelines, we have a whole chapter on what new construction, you know, looks like. And we have like a score sheet for the commission to use. And so also for developers and architects to look at how are we gauging your new construction and how does it fit in with this neighborhood and its context. So there's a lot. And those are all available on our website, which is Spokane or historicspokane.org. You can look at our local districts, and every one of them has the design standards and guidelines. It has the ordinances, it has the nomination documents and the resource form. So it's there for the taking.
Great. And so, yeah, you keep answering my follow-up questions. You're so great, Megan, before I even ask them. So yeah, that was I heard you speaking about this at our Places conference last year, and incompatible new development in a local historic district. And if you could maybe just talk a little bit more about that compatibility in a local historic district for new development.
Sure. Yeah. So for us, I mean, we actually our guidelines, and if you look at our chapters on new construction, they have different like sort of different philosophies about what new construction could be in a historic district. It could be, invention within, or it's got all these different sort of things. So it could be something where you're more, looking at, the crafts, if it's all craftsman homes around it, or, they're all brick Tudor cottages or something, you know, you could take some elements of those buildings and use them maybe in a simplified form, but still the same scale and massing and those kinds of things. So you're looking at it as compatible. The big thing for the most recent district is Cannon Hill suburb, or not Cannon Hill suburb, Cannon Hill Park Historic District, is, they're really concerned about the setbacks and just sort of how all of the properties fit in with each other and the landscape. It was kind of a designed landscape around a park. And so a lot of what they focused on in the nomination was about this designed landscape, which included a boulevard and a park and just some winding streets and things like that, and how each property relates to each other. So, they weren't as concerned about changes to the properties, but they were actually even going to have us be, they didn't really want us to do a lot of design review of properties. And I just said, it's too difficult for us to try to keep track. We're going to have to, keep the Secretary standards, obviously, and really review street facing facades. That's mostly what we are concerned with, and new construction. So we also always say the words contemporary but compatible when we're talking about new construction. We do not want faux historic. We don't want somebody to walk down the street and think, huh, is that old or is that not old? Like, that's not really what. Now, I would imagine most homeowners or property owners in those districts would probably want to see us make people do very historic looking, little faux historic, little Disney World kind of faux historic houses. That's not what we would do. So we want something to be a product of its time, but also to be, sort of disappear in the landscape. We don't want it to, be like standing out screaming, hey, look at me, I'm new. That's not the point either. So subdued, contemporary, but compatible. So it's a challenge because our expertise is not in new construction, but that's really how we look at it.
You don't have a separate review board for new construction.
No,
okay,
it's
because I
our
know some
landmarks commission.
communities
Yeah.
have done that.
Oh,
Okay,
do they?
yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
When I was in Charleston in graduate school, they had
Ah.
a different, or they had started a different review process for. Mhm.
We do have a design review board for other kinds of projects like government projects or projects within the downtown. If they're not historic, then the design review board looks at them, and
Yeah.
we don't cross over in that. But if it's something that's historic, then landmarks would look at any new construction.
And thank you for touching on that, compatibility aspect. I mean, that's the thing that a lot of people don't realize about, and that comes straight out of the Secretary of the Interior's standards, is that compatibility without the faux historicism.
Right.
And also, I was up at Audubon Park a while ago in Spokane, and there's all these craftsmen and stuff around the park, and all kind of the same period. And then there's this like very boxy, brand new, something,
Yeah.
and it just really sticks out like a sore
Yeah.
thumb. It's not compatible.
Yeah,
And I was just thinking, wow, like that's yeah, you're not going to miss that.
no historic district there.
But no historic district there. Yes,
Right,
no historic
right.
district there. And then I wanted to ask you, I know we just got a couple more minutes and we'll answer some questions. But the last thing I wanted to ask you, so you've had most of your local districts, you've had the communities reach out to you. Have you done any outreach to a community to inquire about a local district?
You know, most of it does start with the,
Okay.
I mean, it is a process, and we are not
Yeah.
really actually out there actively trying to find new historic districts. And I'll tell you that, um, for us old timers, I see some names that I recognize from long ago, in preservation. And I've had this conversation with you before, Michelle, where it's like, man, in the last 10 years being in preservation, the old timey argument of it's my property. I don't want anyone telling me what I can or can't do with it. That is old. That is old news. Like that is not what the arguments are anymore. Now it is really much more the urbanists and you know the planners sit right next to me, so I can't say this too loud, but planning community, that stuff where, the housing crisis, how build housing at any cost. It shouldn't matter what it looks like. It shouldn't matter. It just, we need to build our way out of this housing crisis. And I get it, but we are all walking a very tight line right now in terms of the arguments about historic districts now are you're trying to keep new development out. You're trying to stop any new development. And we always say, listen, anything you can build in this district, the underlying zoning does not change. It is really there to now look at what that new construction looks like. So it's not a negative impact on people who have already invested their own money and energy and everything else in their homes or their buildings or whatever it happens to be. But the argument really is about you're keeping out, housing opportunities, and we're not. But it is a challenge, and that the argument has definitely changed from the old standards to this new, drawing boundaries and using preservation as a NIMBY tool. And it's hard to argue against all of that. We're doing our best, but we are not actively going out and seeking new districts, except for like Garland. That makes sense because it's a very small district. It's a commercial district. We don't have a lot of those. So there's some reasons why that one makes sense in Spokane, but going out and for anybody that's familiar with Spokane, Rockwood Boulevard or Manitou Boulevard, those are not going to be places that we're going to be asking for grant money for. It's just not going to happen because we understand that
Right.
that's just not the side we want to be on right
Right.
now.
Right. And there was no criticism in me asking if you had
Oh
done any
yeah,
outreach.
yeah,
I was just interested in how you might have
yeah,
approached that because obviously we're going to have, Spokane being the second largest city in the state, we're going to have communities that don't have so many potential local
of
districts.
course, yes.
And then Megan and her colleague Logan did a really wonderful presentation. I had mentioned this earlier at our Places conference last year on the changing landscape of the local register districts, and she's touching on that a little bit with the NIMBY YIMBY. And so maybe at some point we'll ask you if you would mind doing a follow up, and we could talk a little bit more about kind of
Mhm.
that changing landscape.
Sure.
With support or non-support or misinformation about local register districts. So one more question, I just as a final follow-up, and then we're going to take questions. Any piece of advice, final advice, any in your sage years of wisdom and
Oh, I think when you're talking about districts, it's really important to not just be doing it as staff, not just trying to run through this process. And, we can all write the nomination, we could all do those kinds of things, but you really, really, really have to have a solid group of citizens and property owners within the proposed district. They have to be the champions of this. Really, once we send out the ballots and the voting starts, we are not advocating one way or the other for that. That has to be the property owners and the neighbors, and that has to be who is really advocating for the creation of this district. And so as we are just getting into the process of landmarks commission, I mean, Landmarks Commission, this is right in our wheelhouse, so it's not going to be that big of a deal. We don't need a million people to come and testify to us about why it's important to pass this. But when it gets to Plan Commission, who is very much, as I said, thinking about housing opportunities and not really liking the idea of historic districts, which is too bad because it's part of the comprehensive plan that the Plan Commission is, tasked with making sure that historic districts are all over our comprehensive plan, and we try to tell them that we're just helping them to implement their own plan, and
Great.
helping create these districts. So anyway, I think that's the important part is having those people show up when it's important. When city council doesn't see these all the time. These are kind of new and like, what again is this? And so anyway, that's when you just really need a real community to create one of these.
Awesome.
Not for the faint of
Thank you.
heart.
No, not to scare you, but yes,
Mhm.
know what you're getting into.
Mhm.
Great. Thank you so much. And if you wouldn't mind sticking around just for a
Yeah,
few more minutes, and we'll take some questions. Anybody have questions, go ahead and raise your virtual hand or come on video if you want to. You don't have to. You can always email me or call me, and I can get questions to Megan if I have to. Any questions about those grants that we have, those certified local government grants for doing survey, local district design guidelines, lots of other stuff. I'm your go-to person for kind of everything special tax valuation questions we had today. Any clarifications?
we covered it all, Michelle.
Okay, cool, good. All right. Well, thanks everybody so much. And this, I think, concludes our DAP academies for the season, and we will be getting on working on more of those in a few months. So stay tuned for those, and we love doing these. So we've been doing these DAP academies again. We've kind of started those up again recently, and that's been a lot of fun for us at DAP. So look forward to more of those, and stay in touch. And thanks, Megan, and thanks everybody for joining us. Really appreciate it. All right.
Great, thank you.
Bye.
You.
Bye.